Chapter Spooks.
G'day, and welcome to Chapter Spooks, where we talk about the books to keep your kids up at night. First things first, if I sound a little different, I'm just getting over the tail end of a cold. Thankfully, I don't have a headache or anything, it just means that I've got a slightly heavier voice. But I am keen to talk about today's book, The Queen of the Gargoyles, by another new ghostwriter for us, Jean Holt. First things first, Jean Holt is actually a male writer. Because a character of mine is called Eugenia, I actually thought that Jean was a woman, but no, Jean is a male author. And he's written an awful lot of books, but not under that name. He actually uses the pseudonym J.E. Bright, under which he's written hundreds of kids' books. A lot of them adaptations of things. I think he did a Batman, he did some Clifford, and even some adaptations of movies aimed at younger kids in a chapter book format. But he also hasn't written very many horror stories. I don't know what this is about. Maybe people were just jumping at the opportunity to write a horror story? And I can't fault them for that. After all, I write horror stories because I find it fun. It's just weird to me that so many people seem to just dip their toe into it. I assume it's because it was very popular at the time. This was still sort of the mid to late 90s, where this was a very popular genre. Goosebumps was still king of the world. So on the one hand, I get it. I'm just surprised that so few, after even attempting this, didn't ever try it again. But another thing that I learned, and I found this interesting, is that I learned that Jean Holt is actually a gay man. He wrote a story in the anthology Shenanigans, Gay Men Mess with Genre, all about gay authors writing in different genres from their sort of perspective. And he also wrote a book of poetry called Life After Catfish, all about the experience of being in love with the perfect man, only to learn that he was catfishing you on the app Grindr. But I bring this up for two reasons. First of all, I love a bit of queer representation, so I wanted to celebrate that as soon as I found it in this series. But secondly, I thought it was a good excuse to analyze this book from sort of a queer theory perspective. Now, don't get me wrong, I haven't done proper queer theory in a while. I think I did Extension English. God, I'm old. Too many years ago. So I'm not saying that I'm necessarily the best when it comes to literary analysis, but I thought it would be interesting to look at it through that lens, because when I looked at it like that, I saw some interesting things pop up. But in order to get to that queer theory and analysis, we first have to know what the heck we're talking about. So let's just dive into the summary of Bone Chillers number 16, The Queen of the Gargoyles. We first meet our protagonist, Isabella, as she's heading up to meet her Aunt Bee, who lives in New York. And when I say going to meet, I mean she's literally in the elevator traveling up the building with her parents. We're going to drop her off there. The second thing we learn is that Isabella is a horse girl, because she adores horses. She was planning on staying at a ranch with her friend from school, but she can't do that because her parents got tickets to go on a European holiday, so instead she has to be taken to New York to stay with her great Aunt Bee so she can be supervised over the school holidays. Aunt Bee lives in the penthouse of this building, so as they're heading up, the elevator stops, someone else gets on to head higher. And when he sees Isabella, he asks if she's staying in the building, and when her parents say she is, he says, "Such a beautiful little girl. So sad." And I like this because not only is it good foreshadowing, but when he then gets off the elevator, her parents turn to her and say, "Yeah, stay away from that man." And Isabella agrees, because that's a creepy thing to say, right? When they get to the penthouse landing, we get our first chapter scare, because they knock on the door, it's opened, and then Isabella screams because there's a monster standing in the doorway. Now, this monster is Jonesy, who is Aunt Bee's butler, but he also is a monster. He's a gargoyle. They plainly describe him as being quite squat, with sharp little teeth. He's got eyes that are too big for his face, a head too big for his body. His skin is green and grey, and when he walks away, they see that under his little butler's uniform, he has lumps on his shoulders, obviously where his wings are. And look, I get that Jean just wanted to have a chapter scare here, but I think it could have been handled better. But we'll talk about that more at the end of this summary. So Jonesy takes them into the apartment, and they meet Aunt Bee. So she's sitting in the middle of her lounge room, which, by the way, is gorgeous. This is the penthouse, so she's got huge bookcases, enormous, luxurious couches you can sink into. She's got gorgeous settings and furniture all throughout the place. And when they see Aunt Bee, she's this tiny little woman sitting on the couch with her hair up in a bun, and she's knitting. And when she sees them, she's such a welcoming. She's saying, "Oh, come in. I want to see my grandniece here. Come, give me a hug." And so she's really welcoming, really friendly. And that puts down Isabella's guard a bit. She's a bit more enthusiastic. But then when she's talking to Aunt B, she says, "Oh, and I hear that you like horses." Isabella, immediately excited, says, "Yeah, of course I adore horses." And Aunt B explains, "Well, I actually used to be a competitive horse rider back in my day. I adore horses myself. And in fact, I happen to know the man who runs the Central Park stables. If you like, one day we could go down and I can get you a ride. So maybe this stay won't be so bad after all." After her parents leave, Isabella starts checking out the apartment because it is really cool. It's got so many elegant details, marble and finishings. It has an iron staircase that spirals up to a greenhouse on the roof. And also the entirety of the apartment, outside all the windows, there's a balcony where she can see gargoyles on every one. In fact, even out front of the guest room where she's going to be staying, there's 3 gargoyles sitting on the ledge. She mentions this to Aunt B because she thinks they're a little creepy looking. In fact, I like that she describes them as sort of half man, half dragon. That's a pretty good description. I like that. But when she says this, Aunt B says, "Oh, look, there's nothing to worry about. They're actually designed originally to ward off evil spirits. So don't think of them as scary monsters. Think of them as, like, servants here to protect you. I think of them as my servants and my friends." Quick fact check here. Gargoyles were not designed to protect buildings from evil spirits. They were designed to protect old buildings from rainwater, especially mason buildings. If water pooled in the balconies or in the low-lying areas of the roof, it could cause a lot of erosion and damage and, build up a mold. So they had gargoyles designed with their mouths open so that the water would go through a little gully in the back and out their mouth. That's even why they're called gargoyles, because it's from the French sound of like gurgling water, and I think also the word for mouth, ghoul, so gargoyle. If you want to be pedantic, as I often do, technically the monsters in this book aren't gargoyles, they are grotesques. And a grotesque was, if it's on a cathedral, it has religious significance. But usually it was just put on buildings because it looked cool, and it was part of the Gothic style. But even that is getting a bit too pedantic for my tastes. People use the word gargoyle as a synonym for grotesque, and that's perfectly fine. Also, whilst real gargoyles aren't protecting you from evil, they also don't come to life, so whilst it's not historically accurate, it is lore accurate for this book. Anyway, Isabella goes to sleep, and she manages to have sweet dreams thinking about dragon people. But of course there's little mention that she's sure that when she opens her eyes, she sees that one of the gargoyles is looking at her, but when she blinks, it goes back to the position it was in before. But this is only chapter 3, so we have to dismiss that as just a trick your mind is playing on you. The next morning, Isabella wakes up and eats breakfast with Aunt B, served by Jonesy, who she's starting to get used to. Aunt B explains, though, that she has a couple of errands, appointments. She's a little bit vague, but says she'll be back that afternoon. So if she ever leaves the apartment, because there's some precious stuff in there, she needs to make sure that she locks the door. And also, just little thing, don't worry too much about it, but there is a room that you're not allowed into, which is locked because it's got some valuable things inside that she doesn't want her to touch. But because she's a child, obviously, as soon as Aunt B leaves, she heads towards the locked room to see if the door is actually locked, and it is, and she presses her ear up against it to see if she can hear anything, but all she can hear is a strange whooshing sound, like wind through the trees or something. She doesn't know what it is. But as she's listening to this, she gets jump scared by Jonesy coming up behind her. But Jonesy isn't seeing that she's trying to get in the room or anything. It's locked. He's fine. He just says, "Oh, here's your keys to the apartment. Make sure you lock it on the way out." So Isabella decides to do some exploring. So she heads out, locks the door, and she heads down the elevator to the lobby. And we get another interesting interaction with the bellhop. It does describe him. He's wearing the uniform of a organ grinder's monkey. Because, that is what they wear. But this guy says, "You're staying here? For how long?" And she says, "Just a week for the school holidays." And he says to himself, "Oh, a week." And he sort of mumbles under his breath, "Okay, good, that should be safe." And when Isabella asks him what he means by safe, he says, nothing whatsoever. I gotta get back to work." And he runs off. Isabella doesn't understand this, but she also doesn't care because it seems boring. She's bored, so she decides that she wants to keep exploring. She finds a little door to the side of the lobby that leads to some stairs down to the basement, so she starts heading down the stairs. When she gets to the bottom, she sees that she's in this little hallway that she opens up that leads to an enormous ballroom. this gorgeous room, amazing tiles. It's got a bar all the way along one side, completely empty. It's just got the lights on so that she can see where she's going. So she decides to head through this ballroom. But as she does, there's a creepy moment where she seems to be getting like cold chills, like she's walking through a cold spot. And as she's walking, she swears that behind the echo of her footsteps, she can hear the sound of faraway music, maybe even laughter and dancing, but it's so quiet she can't be sure. Then she feels cold fingers on her shoulder, and it makes her jump and panic. She decides to race out of the ballroom, so she runs to the other end, and she manages to get the door open. It's stuck at first, but she manages to push it open, and she gets into the next hallway. And I actually like this scene so much, I need to share it with you. Isabella stood a moment, panting, checking out the long hallway she was in now. The hall stretched into darkness in the distance, with plain, unmarked doors evenly spaced down its length. She swallowed once, and then headed for the first door on the right. It was locked. She tried the next few, and they were also locked. What's the point of all these doors if they're all locked, she asked herself. I'm never going to find anything cool down here. Isabella had almost made up her mind to go back to Aunt Bee's apartment when she heard a noise. She froze, but then realized the sound was just water dripping, plink plonk, somewhere up ahead. I'll try one more door, she decided, and then I'm giving up. That's when she heard the first footstep behind her. Isabella whirled around to see who was coming down the hallway. Nobody was there. But when she turned around to look in the other direction, the footsteps immediately shuffled behind her again. Solid, heavy footsteps. Isabella peeked over her shoulder. There was nothing there, but when she started toward the next blank door in the hallway, again the sound of footsteps clattered menacingly. Isabella started to run. Behind her came the sound of stomping feet. Still running, she glanced back, almost losing her balance, and the sound immediately stopped like a faucet turned off. But when she faced forward again, the noise of running feet kept pace with her. She was being chased by something she couldn't see. This is crazy, Isabella thought. I've got to get out of here. She passed the next few unmarked doors without slowing down. Isabella just had a feeling they were locked. She started to run faster, and the footsteps behind her ran faster too. Up ahead, she saw a door with a sign on it. As she came closer, she saw that the sign read, Laundry Room. With an extra burst of speed, Isabella scrambled toward the door. As she grabbed the doorknob, the footsteps behind her stopped, and she heard a low, disturbing moan echo down the hallway. Isabella yanked open the laundry room door and dove inside. She slammed the door behind her, and something banged it from the other side with a deep thump. Oh, I gotta admit, I love this scene so much. She either has to run to safety whilst knowing that it's on her heels, or turn and face it and know that she will be keeping it safe, but she has to be facing the danger the whole time. Like, come on, that's brilliant. I love that stuff. But after this whole chase scene's over, she's in the laundry room, and she hears a strange moaning sound. It's a nice little creep factor. Like, I like how they describe it as like a hiccuping groan, until we realize that it's actually a little kid crying. She finds a kid called Jay, who's crying his eyes out in the laundry room. And the reason why is that his sister, Stephanie, has gone missing. And now we can sort of piece together why everyone's so upset that there's a young girl in the building, because a young girl recently went missing. Jay explains that 5 days ago, his sister wanted to go up onto the roof using a telescope to see if she could see the stars. Jay said she couldn't because they're in the city, but she hoped the high roof of this building would be able to see through the clouds. Unfortunately, she wasn't seen ever since. They called the police and everything, but no one could find her. And now, Jay thinks she's probably dead. That's why he was crying. But Isabella insists, no, the police, maybe they just didn't find her. I mean, this is a big building, so how about we go up to the roof? In fact, my Aunt Bee, she lives on the penthouse. Maybe if you come with me into the greenhouse, we can see if we can get access to the roof and see if we can find your sister. Jay agrees that it's a pretty good idea, so they head to go up to the elevator to head up, but first she asks him, is there another way out of this room? Because I don't want to go back in that hallway, although she doesn't elaborate on why. So they go through the service elevator and head up to the penthouse. When they get to the apartment, Aunt Bee is back already from her many vague appointments, asks if Isabella is ready to go ride the horses, and she says, I'd love to, but first can we show Jay the greenhouse? And Aunt Bee, being really kind, is like, oh, well, a friend of yours is a friend of mine. Yeah, sure, you can look at the greenhouse, but then we can go. In fact, you can bring your friend with you. So they head up the spiral staircase to the greenhouse, and Isabella goes through the glass door to look around on the balcony, see if there's a door out there. But Jay insists that he is really scared of heights, so he says, I don't want to go out there. I don't think you should go out there either, but Isabella insists, oh, well, I'm not scared of heights, it's fine. So he starts looking around in the greenhouse, see if maybe there's another staircase up. But as she's looking, she can't help but look over the edge. And so she puts an arm on one of the gargoyles, and she leans over to see the street. But as she does, she slips, she lets go of the gargoyle and she starts stumbling forward, her arms windmilling in the air. And there's actually a chapter scare as she thinks, I'm going to fall. Now, there's a moment here that I would like to talk about at the end of the summary, so I will get back to that. But what's important is that a hand reaches forward, grabs her, and pulls her back onto the ledge. And so she's so thankful. And so she turns around to thank Jay, but Jay is nowhere to be seen. In fact, when she goes back in the door and asks for Jay, he comes running from the other side of the greenhouse saying, "What's up?" And she explains that she nearly fell. And she said, "Did he go out there?" He said, "No, I mean, you're so lucky. I would never go out there." Now, yes, you know and I know, and most kids know, I think, that the gargoyle saved her. But still, it was a good scene. Well, except for the bit that I'll talk about at the end, but we'll get to that when we get to it. So the kids get ready and they go to the park with Aunt Bee. So she's basically just sitting in a chair lounging. She's too old and stiff to go riding horses. So Isabella gets on a horse. Apparently it's called Old Rob, and Jay is on a horse called Sister Eileen, but he's not really used to riding horses. In fact, his helmet's sitting a bit loose on his head, it's one size too big, and we start the scene with him completely unable to control his horse. He's trying to pull on the reins, he's trying to get stuff to happen, but the horse is just wandering off, just chewing on some weeds. So Isabella has to get Old Rob to stand in front of Sister Eileen and sort of lead the way, as it were. But once they get going, they're both having a bit of fun, and she, like I said, she's a horse girl. She is having the time of her life. She loves this stuff. But she decides, hey, how about we just go say hello to Aunt Bee? She looks like she's just sun lounging, staring up at the sky. So they walk their horses over, but Aunt Bee looks a little bit distracted. She seems to be looking up at the sky, sort of nodding, maybe even talking to herself. But as they get closer to her, suddenly, like a jack-in-the-box, she jumps up onto her feet, and she's staring dead into Old Rob's eyes. And as she does, it scares the bejesus out of this horse. It actually rears up on its legs, and Isabella is grasping onto its neck, holding on for dear life, as it turns around and starts galloping off, terrified. And so Isabella, she wants to get control of the horse, but after it reared up like that, she lost control of the reins. They've fallen over the head, and she can't actually reach them from where she is. And the horse is galloping full tilt towards the trees. She's thinking, oh, well, at least if it gets to the trees, that'll slow him down, that'll calm him down. But no, he is so petrified. She can tell as he starts running through the trees that he isn't paying attention to anything. He is terrified. And so the branches are whipping around her as it's running through the trees. And then someone on another horse, someone she doesn't recognize, comes racing up in front of her. And it runs in front of Old Rob, forcing him to angrily whinny as he turns and has to start running to the other direction. It's running away from the trees, and then the horse is running alongside them, and they're both struggling. And at this point, because all these branches have been smacking her in the face, because she doesn't have control of the reins, she's hanging on for the neck, she's starting to slip, and she doesn't know whether she needs to jump off and do a safe fall, or whether or not she can get control of this horse because she's worried about him. But this stranger on the horse manages to grab hold of the reins and pulls up on Old Rob's reins as well as his own horse's. And that's when she sees him push his helmet back onto his head, because it's one size too big, so it doesn't fit him very well. And she's shocked to see it was Jay. He actually saved her. So she hops off and thanks Jay for saving her, saying that she was surprised he managed to. And he said, well, me too. It was really Sister Eileen that did it. I really was just wanting to help you, and she helped me do it. So he hops off his horse as well, and they decide to walk them back to the stables, because they've both had plenty enough riding for one day. And whilst the book doesn't dwell on this too much, I love the fact that Aunt Bee just jumped up and stared a horse in the eye, and it was enough to terrify it so much it put its own life in danger trying to run away. So we're starting to get some hint that there is something not quite right about Aunt Bee. In the taxi ride back to her apartment, Aunt Bee is just apologizing so much, saying, I'm so sorry. You surprised me bringing the horses up, and that's why I jumped up so suddenly. I didn't mean to spook it. But she then insists, oh, and Jay, thank you so much for saving my grandniece. You know what? In fact, I want to celebrate the fact that you were the hero that saved my grandniece's life, so I want to throw a pizza party just for you. And whilst Jay is still insistent, hey, it wasn't really me, it was Sister Eileen, it was the horse, he and Isabella still think the idea of a pizza party sounds like a lot of fun. So the next day, Jay comes over to visit, and Aunt Bee has got several pizzas ready, and they're enjoying the pizza. But after they've had the pizza and a little bit of goofing around, having fun, they go to sit on the couch, and Aunt Bee starts asking Jay some weird questions. Well, thanks, I guess, he told Aunt Bee. "Oh, no need to thank me," Aunt Bee boomed. "This party is to thank you for saving my grandniece's life. But now I'm curious about our young hero. May I ask you a few questions?" Jay plopped down on the couch next to Isabella. "Well, sure, I guess," he said. He glanced at Isabella with a questioning look as if to ask, "Do you know what this is about?" Isabella just shrugged. "Now, my dear boy," Aunt Bee began, "I've always been curious about your parents' apartment. I have never been inside, and all the apartments in the building are quite different from one another. Which room is yours?" "Which room?" Jay repeated, puzzled. "Well, I don't know. How do you mean?" Aunt Bee smiled, her mouth twitching. "Here we go," Isabella thought. "Time for some weirdness." "Which direction does your bedroom window face?" Aunt Bee pressed. "North, south, east, or west?" Jay began. "What does this matter?" Isabella interrupted. "Darling, I'm just curious," Aunt Bee replied evenly. "You don't mind, do you, young man?" "Well, I guess not," Jay replied. "But which way's west?" Aunt Bee held a finger to her lips. "Let's see," she said. "The Empire State Building is always south of us, since it's downtown from here. So then the west would be to my right, and to my left the east, and north behind you," Isabella added. "Correct, darling," Aunt Bee exclaimed. Then she turned to Jay and narrowed her eyes. "So which is it, young man?" she asked. "Well, Jay replied. "I guess the east, but I have 2 windows, so I guess the east and north." "Lovely," Aunt Bee purred. "And are you a light sleeper?" "I guess not," Jay replied. "My mother says I can sleep through a train wreck." "Good," Aunt Bee exclaimed. "Can you cook?" "These questions are weird," Isabella interrupted. "Don't you have a TV or something we could watch?" "Don't be rude, dear," Aunt Bee muttered darkly. I'm in 2 minds about this. On the one hand, I really like the way that this is sort of done, because whilst her falling off the building and being caught by the gargoyle, that's something that I think most kids can figure out pretty quickly. Okay, the gargoyle saved her. This is more subtle. Unless a kid has already figured out that she's controlling the gargoyles and that she's the one responsible for the kids disappearing and all this stuff, I think this is a bit more subtle, and so it might take them more time. But by the same token, I think it's an unrealistic character moment. I'll talk at the end about how I would improve it, but I do think the way that she asks the questions is a bit too on the nose. But because Aunt Bee is acting weird, they both say, "Look, we'd like to do something else." And she doesn't have a TV, so they just decide to explore a little bit. They ask if maybe they could check out the greenhouse, but she says absolutely not. It's too dark out there, it'd be too dangerous, and there are some really fragile plants. So instead, they just decide to wander around, goofing off a little bit. But as they're heading down the hall and they see the secret room, Jay asks about it, and Isabella just sort of jokes about what's inside, saying, "Well, say valuable stuff like treasure and diamonds, but hey, she's acting a little weird. Maybe there's like 7 heads in there or something." And Jay insists that she doesn't say stuff like that because it's creepy and gross, but at the same time he says he's really thankful to be her friend. After all, he was really scared being in this building because a lot of kids have gone missing and he was scared he'd be next. Which is a little epiphany for Isabella, who's like, "Oh, so that's why everyone keeps acting weird around me, saying that you're safe and stuff." But we get a sweet moment as Jay says, "Yeah, and I was really scared about that until I met you and made a good friend." Okay, so that was the end of chapter 10 of this book that has 20 chapters in it, and I wonder how you're doing, Are you feeling good? Have you stretched? Are you sitting comfortably? I hope so, because this book is about to go from 0 to 100. Because in chapter 11, a girl wakes up because she was in bed. It's about midnight. She couldn't sleep. So she gets out of bed because she can hear this sound. It's like whistling and grunting and that weird whooshing sound, the wind sound. And so she gets out of bed, heads to the hall, and she sees that secret room is open and there's light coming from inside. And she has to know what's going on. She can hear these strange sounds, this whistling, and the door to the secret room is open. So she goes over, she pushes open the door, and what she sees is this special room. It's just an empty room, basically bare concrete, but where the window should be, there's a big sliding door that's been pushed aside. That's what the whooshing sound is. But as for the whistling and other sounds coming in, her Aunt Bee is dressed up in a white gown with silver streaks and a big witch's hat. She's got a whistle hanging on a red rope around her neck, and she is dancing around a chair where her friend Jay has been strapped with ropes, and her aunt is going around her dancing, going, "Naught, woohoo, naught." Jay is crying, he looks terrified, but her aunt is dancing around like an absolute fruitcake, so she doesn't know whether to laugh or cry as she's watching this. But before Isabella can do anything, then, through the big open door/window, several gargoyles, led by Jonesy, now not wearing his butler's uniform, fly in through the window, and then surround Jay. And at the sight of all of this, Isabella can't help but scream in terror, because these things, they are muscly, they look like, granite, they're howling like monsters. Of course, Aunt B hears this, so she grabs Isabella, and she's surprisingly strong for such a little woman, but she grabs Isabella and says, look, we must do this, we don't have much time. So she instructs the gargoyles to hold her, and they are literally made of stone, so when they grab her around her arms, she is like she's being pressed in a stone vice. And now Aunt B gets back to dancing, but as she does, she gets a little blow on that whistle, and the gargoyles stand around him and they start humming, this strange ritual chorus. And I didn't even mention the fact that it's raining, but yeah, it's been storming outside, there's thunder cracking, and right as she says, "Naught, woohoo, naught, naught," and screams and chants, suddenly there is a spike of lightning that comes through the window and hits Aunt B just as she places her hand on Jay. There's a blinding flash of light. Isabella closes her eyes, and when she opens them, she sees that the ropes have been rent off his body, the chair is smashed, but where Jay was sitting now stands a gargoyle. And because she can't handle the shock, Isabella faints. When she opens her eyes, she was hoping that that was all some kind of a nightmare, but she realizes that she's laying on the concrete of that secret room of her Aunt B's, and when she looks around, she sees that she is surrounded by those gargoyles. The book never explicitly says how many, but there's got to be at least a dozen. And when they see that she's woken up, they start to surround her. She's terrified. She tells them to stay back, don't hurt her, but they get closer and they say to her, "Please don't be frightened. We aren't going to hurt you. We love you." And she's just confused by that, as I was. Like, what do you mean you love me? You don't even know me. But they explain, no, we are here to take care of you. And they explain, in fact, that one of them, called William, he says that he was the one who followed her into the basement to make sure that she was safe. That's why there was that scene of something running after her. And another one says that he was the one that grabbed her when she was falling off the ledge. She also sees a gargoyle with dark eyes that look familiar, and she asks if his name is Jay, and he's surprised, and he says, "Well, how did you know? I've not been here long, but I love you, and I feel like I've always been here. I don't remember anything but this." And it's sort of a sad moment, realizing that these are the kids. In fact, she also meets Stephanie, who has some gems in her forehead that make her stand out. And none of them truly remember what it was like when they were kids. I mean, they have a little bit. Stephanie says she remembers loving the stars, and Jay says that he knows that he loves Isabella because she is his friend, but they don't want to remember because it's easier to forget. And then they start crying, and I don't know if I like this or not, but there's a little detail saying that all of the tears on their face are actually little stones that fall off their cheeks, scatter the ground, and become dust when they smash into the ground. And that's weird, but it's a pretty sad scene. Even Isabella says that it's the saddest story she's ever heard, but she doesn't want to go turning into a gargoyle herself. She wants to be human, and so she insists that they need to get out of there. All the gargoyles say, "We can't do that. That's against Aunt B's wishes. She said it's forbidden." She says, "I'm not scared of Aunt B. She's just an old lady. What can she do?" And as if on cue, that's when the door opens and Aunt B is standing there, still in her weird white witch's outfit, smiling with the corners of her lip trembling as she does. Isabella tries to run out of the door, but it turns out that Aunt B is actually quite stocky and stronger than she looks, because she's blocking the doorway and Isabella can't get past. And that's when she grabs a whistle and blows on it and then tells the gargoyles to restrain her. And then we learn how her control works, because when she blows on the whistle, all the gargoyles look like they're hypnotized, and then they do exactly what she says. So they grab her and they hold her to restrain her. And I kind of like there's a little bit of a villain monologue, because she's basically telling her, "Look, you can't escape. I didn't want you to see this now, but now that you're here, I need to keep you locked in your room until we can fix this." And she's like, "Well, you're evil. You're a monster." And Aunt B is saying, "I don't know what you're saying. I am not a monster." She's like, "But you turn kids into gargoyles. That's horrible." She says, "I don't understand why that would be horrible. These kids now don't get hungry. They don't get cold. They always feel completely loved, and they will live for centuries. What's so bad about that?" And there's a little bit more back and forth, but I really like it that the conversation ends basically when she's like, look, you are a horrible, evil woman. You're a terrible person. And Aunt B just says, well, I suppose you're entitled to your opinion. And then commands the gargoyles to take her to her room. But Isabella gets an idea. She quickly sucks in her gut so that she's smaller than the stone arms around her. She slips through the loop, scratching her head because it was a pretty tight grip. But then she runs and she slips between Aunt B's legs. And we get a little action chase scene as Jonesy's the first to chase after. I mean, all the other gargoyles are coming, but they sort of get a Three Stooges, get sort of stuck in the doorway, tumbling over each other. But Jonesy's chasing her, so she heads for the door, but he gets there first. And so she heads back to the dining room table, and they do sort of like a back and forth. She goes right, he follows. She goes left, he follows. And then they start racing around the table in circles. And he starts catching up to her, but she realizes that every time she turns, because his feet are made of stone, they're slipping on the tile. So she runs even faster, and he skittles, and he hits his head on the oven. And so then she starts running back, but then she sees that all the other gargoyles have gotten over themselves now, and they start chasing her, and she can't get to the doorway quick enough, so she starts climbing the bookshelf, just managing to kick one of them off her feet as it tries to grab her. And she gets to the top just as it starts to topple, because all the other gargoyles are climbing, and she jumps off it, jumps onto the couch, and manages to bounce off and over as the bookcase falls on top of all the gargoyles, and then she runs for the door. But Jonesy has managed to recover, and even though he's got one hand on his head because he's bumped it really hard, he grabs her ankle with his free hand, and she can't kick free of his stone claws no matter what she does because he's got a tight grip. So he then takes her back to the room. We continue our little villain monologue. Isabella is desperate, saying, no, you've got to let me out. But Aunt B says, I'm afraid you can't go anywhere. After all, you are next in line. So they lock her in a room, and this time the three gargoyles on the balcony ledge are no longer guardians but wardens. They're there to make sure that she does not escape. But as she's pacing around her room and looking, she recognizes that one of the gargoyles has those dark eyes. It's the J gargoyle. She thinks that she can get through to him, so she heads over and she whispers, saying, Jay, can you hear me? And she talks about what they've been through, saying, don't you remember how you chased me with your horse and you saved my life in Central Park? Or don't you remember how I found you in the laundry when you were crying for your lost sister? Well, we found her. She's turned into a gargoyle, and so are you. But please don't let it happen to me too. And Isabella is pitiful. She's crying. And that's when Jay turns to her and says, well, climb on then. Quickly, we better get out of here. As soon as she climbs onto his back, the other gargoyles turn and say, that's forbidden. But they don't care. They just say, we're off, and they jump off. But not long after, they see that several gargoyles have jumped off with her and have started chasing her. And so, whilst they're flying through the air, they realize they need to start avoiding these gargoyles so they can get to safety. And then not long after, they see that Aunt B has also climbed onto the back of a gargoyle and is flying with a butterfly net to catch her. And so they have to start going around the buildings, doing loops, and there's two moments where they're flying low over the forest and a man looks up at them and he just looks completely shocked, or they see a woman who's vacuuming in a building and she dropped. It very much feels like that, kids movie thing of how something strange happens out the window and, the drunk looks at it and he just pours out his wine bottle. You know what I'm talking about? Those sort of cliched moments. This book puts two of them in here, but they're flying around and they have to do some nifty stuff like flying really close to the building because the other ones can't fly as tightly as she can because she's really good, flying horseback and I guess gargoyle back now. And then they see Aunt B is there and they need to avoid her net, but she's just in front of them, so they decide to do a loop to try to avoid it. Like, it's another crazy action scene, right? But it ends when they try to do that loop maneuver and she gets caught in the butterfly net. I'll talk about that more at the end as well. But they get caught, and so they come right back to the building again. But this time, Aunt B ties her to the chair, saying that she's too much trouble, because she keeps trying to escape. And so now she has no choice but to just get this over with, I guess. And Isabella is pleading, and Jay the gargoyle tries to stop her, but Aunt B's too quick. She blows on the whistle and says, go to sleep, Jay. And he does. And so now Isabella's stuck there as her aunt stands before her, and she raises her arms, then takes off her weird witch's hat and puts it on Isabella's head. Then she takes the whistle on the red rope off her neck and puts that on her head as well, and says, I hereby name Isabella Richmond the new Queen of the Gargoyles. Long may she reign. All the gargoyles echo it, long may she reign. Isabella is very confused, saying she doesn't understand this, she doesn't want this, but Aunt Bee insists, well, hey, you're the same age I was when I became the Queen of the Gargoyles, and now I've decided to retire. Jonesy and I are going to head off and go on a holiday together. She says, but I don't want this. I like riding horses. I can't stay here. I can't stay in this apartment. And she says, well, maybe I should have mentioned this, but you have to, because it's your magic that keeps the gargoyles alive. So if you leave, they'll die. And then, even though Isabella's still protesting, saying, you didn't tell me that, she's off. Jonesy and Aunt Bee leave the apartment. And then our story ends. The last chapter, Mr. and Mrs. Richmond come to the penthouse after their holiday. They've got a nice tan on. They come inside, and the door is opened by a gargoyle that looks different. He's not Jonesy, but he's got really dark eyes. And when Isabella tells Jay to come inside, let her parents in, they're a little confused, saying, what's going on? And Isabella says, yeah, I've decided I'm not going home. I'm going to stay here. And at first, the parents are joking amongst themselves. Oh, that's kids for you, They say they don't want to go, and then when they're finally there, they don't want to leave. But Isabella just says, oh, yeah, sure, but it's true. I'm not leaving. And then she blows on the whistle, and the rest of the gargoyles shuffled into the room. The end. Okay. So first things first, let's do that little thing I was talking about with the queer theory, because when looking at this, there wasn't all that much when I first read it, but then after learning that Gene Holt is a gay author, I had to look at it, and I mean, obviously there's the stupid joke that it's Queen of the Gargoyles, haha, it's the only title with Queen in it. But more importantly, this is a story that involves a strong, independent woman who is living on her own, even in her old age. There's no mention of a Mr. Aunt Bee. I don't know I'm assuming her last name is Richmond. But I don't think she has one, because think about it. At the end of the story, she goes on holiday with Jonesy, with the gargoyle. So she's clearly in a non-traditional relationship. So whilst it sounds silly, I generally do think that Aunt Bee does sound like a bit of a queer icon, because these brash, but sassy, but strong, powerful women are very common in sort of the queer community as icons that gay men want to live up to. But there's also the interesting choice of words. When she learns that the gargoyles are there and that she's scared of them and they don't want to hurt her, they say, "We love you." And I think that wasn't an accident. I think that's a very specific choice of words. I mean, this was written in the 90s. Think about, everything that... well, some of this is still going on, I'm afraid. It hurts to think about, but it's true that some people don't get to hear that often enough because they're an underrepresented minority. And so I think he chose those words deliberately. And the fact that this is now her new family, found family is another big aspect of the queer community. So the fact that this is a new family that's going to become her family that she lives with and takes care of, and they all love her. Like I said, I feel like that was very deliberate. One thing that clearly wasn't deliberate, and I mean, I don't think it was done on purpose. I think it's just the nature of this being a horror story, that they're stealing kids, it's a kid protagonist, but there is an unfortunate aspect that Aunt Bee is forcing these kids to become gargoyles, and if they are meant to represent sort of like a found family community, sort of the gay community, like that's an unfortunate double meaning there. I don't think that was intended. And it's especially unfair of me to put that on the writer. Like, I think it's very cruel to have a writer, just because they are gay, and then say, oh, well, when I did a queer reading of this, from my interpretation, it was homophobic. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's unfair. I wouldn't do that to a writer who was straight, just because I made an interpretation. Because I don't think this is a harmful representation of any of that stuff. I actually think it's a rather neat little story, quite fun. But that being said, let's get to some of my more specific analysis rather than this generic stuff. So that first chapter scare with Jonesy, where the parents open the door and Isabella screams in Jonesy's face. I know that it's a chapter scare, and even though it's a little bit contrived, I think it would have been done better, and to me it would be more realistic for the parents if they said, oh, by the way, she does have a butler who has a skin condition. Because that's what you do, right? Like, she's a kid, she doesn't know basic social graces of not screaming in someone's face because they look different. That's what you do, you prepare them for it. But I'm not convinced these are great parents anyway. After all, when they go in and talk to Aunt B, she's like, oh, by the way, I love horses, I have access to horses. Did the parents not know that? When they were trying to sell to their daughter, hey, you're not going to stay with horses, maybe one of them could have mentioned, oh, by the way, you can still hang out with horses. And I think Isabella agrees that her parents aren't great because of the ending, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there's a moment in this book that I hate, even though it's pretty fun for the most part, but this is actually a little concerning to me. We're going to talk about this, but it does mean that we're going to be discussing suicide. And so if you are not interested in this discussion, please skip to this timestamp. I'm going to have to record this after. Skip to 42:50, or 2 minutes ahead at the sound of the tone. Okay, so if everyone here is comfortable, like I said, the scene where she's about to fall off the building and then the gargoyle saves her. Great moment, a little bit of creep factor with that sort of lingering, what caused that effect. But in that scene, what happens is a girl leans over the edge of the building and she starts to panic. She thinks, oh no, I'm going to fall, and she starts windmilling her arms. And then, I'm just going to read this straight from the book. Her view of the city lurched at a weird angle as she began to fall. This is it, she thought. A peaceful, calm feeling flooded her, blanketing over the first rush of crazy panic. Goodbye, world. The reason I hate this so much is because I guarantee that there are kids who read this, and whether it's because it's them right now in middle grade, or older kids, teenagers thinking back on this perpetuates this idea that suicide and dying can be peaceful, even though jumping off a building is incredibly painful and horrendous. And I don't know what Gene Holt himself was thinking when he wrote that. I mean, I also don't know if he himself has suicidality. Maybe he was drawing from his own experiences. I don't know. I'm not an armchair psychologist here, but what I am saying is that this is a bad way to represent how kids feel when they're in danger. Because to me, I mean, especially, that imagery of being over the edge of a building and, falling or jumping off, either way, that is a terrible way to teach kids that falling off a building is an okay thing to do. What? No. And this is before we get into the fact that this is a horror story, and to me, what's more horrifying is that she's panicking, and then suddenly she's wrenched to freedom, and she is trying to catch her breath, only to then realize that there was no one there to save her. Like, that to me is so much scarier. Like, why? Not only is this now less scary, I mean, it's disturbing to me because I'm seeing a deeper implication here, but why would you not make it scarier as a horror story? Okay, everyone's back. But as I was saying, yeah, so I don't think that's a very well written scene, and I think it could be scarier as a horror story. Either way, I don't think it belongs in a kid's horror book. I mean, I needed a content warning just to talk about it, for goodness sake. Now, on a much lighter note, I actually don't like the way that Aunt B interrogates Jay to find out where his room is. Like, I'm sure we all get it now that she was getting where it is so that she could send the gargoyles for him, but I think it's just not quite subtle enough. Maybe Jean was told to make it more obvious for the kids, but I feel like if I was going to do that, if I was, had her mindset, I wanted to do that, steal a kid in the night, then I would say, okay, hey Jay, can you see the Empire State Building out your window? And if he says no, that's when she could then go, oh, okay, so what can you see? Like, what can you see, like north, south, or west? Can you see like the Statue of Liberty and all that stuff? And that would be how I'd lead into that question, because she's asking weird questions to begin with. So I don't know why they can't make it a bit more subtle, But my biggest issue with this book has to be that the second half feels so like fun action adventure. And don't get me wrong, my issue isn't that it's fun. Obviously, I want a book to be fun. But the tone feels off. It's, oh wow, look at this amazing running around action scene. Oh, look at how amazing she is. And then, oh, they're flying around through the sky on the back of a gargoyle. That's so cool. Oh, look, all the people, like, oh man, that man is so shocked that he can't believe his eyes. And then the very last scene, where even though it's sort of like, oh, she's sort of turned to the dark side type of thing, it's also basically a wish fulfillment thing, saying, hey, she doesn't have to listen to her parents anymore. She has an amazing penthouse in the middle of New York City. The tone is off. You can have all of the same things happen. You can have all of the same actions happen in the story, but still alter the theme and the vibes of it all to make it feel scary. Because this stuff is scary. You're flying so high over the streets that if you fall, there's no way to save you. There's no way to save you. Or you're being chased by monsters through a house trying to fight for your life because they are made of stone and there is literally no way you can fight them. Your only option is to run, and then you fail. They grab you by the ankle and drag you back to your prison. And yet it's written like a Disney movie moment. And I'm talking like a Disney TV movie, like just so light-hearted and family-friendly. And it's not like Gene Holt can't write this stuff, because that scene I quoted before, I think that was really well done, of her running through the hallway. Like, he seems to know how to do tension, and yet the entire last half of the book has no tension, no build-up. It's all, okay, let's do this, all right? And then we do, oh, wow, that's amazing. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, let's do this. And that ending especially does bug me, because she really doesn't seem like the kind of person to do that. Like, I understand if she's sort of trapped there, especially that last line, how her aunt says, and if you leave, they die. I can understand why she might feel forced to stay and take care of them. Or maybe take them with her. I don't know. It's not really established why they have to stay on the building. But would she really then immediately leverage that so that she can become the matriarch of her household? I feel like if you're going to do a, protagonist turns to evil moment, you need to actually earn it. I mean, this book doesn't really do, like, turn to evil. Like, literally, the book ends how she brings all of the gargoyles into the room, and then that is the last sentence. So it doesn't actually establish whether she's doing that just to prove that she has control, or if she's actually going to take control of her parents, or what. But I feel like this could have worked if either they showed that she felt put upon by her parents a bit more, like maybe that would work, or I personally think this book would be better if they showed her going home, and then when she got home, the gargoyles are there, and her parents might be a bit confused, but she's like, oh no, ever since Aunt B left on her holiday, she's retiring, she wanted me to take the gargoyles as an heirloom or something. It doesn't matter. But the point is, I think that makes more sense. And if you wanted to then do the whole turn to evil thing, like, I've got a scene in my head, and this is what I would write, of her having the gargoyles, and when her parents leave, she tells them that, she's going to take good care of them. And then when she sees some kids, like, bullying another kid, she might just lean towards the J Gargoyle and say, I think I found you a new friend. Something like, this is just what's coming to my mind. This is what I would write. I'm not complaining that Gene didn't write that. I'm complaining that the scene he did write, I feel, doesn't quite fit her character, and, isn't that scary, and sort of comes out of nowhere. And so, all of that being said, I think this book is, unfortunately, I think it's a C+, because I feel like this story sort of has B- energy, but it fails to fulfill the promise of the premise. It is a horror book about gargoyles for kids, and yet the second half of it just feels like a fantasy adventure. And when I pick up a Bone Chillers book or a Chapter Spooks book, that is not what I'm trying to read. So what can we learn from this? And I mean, besides the fact that I'm not very good at queer theory. Well, the first thing to me is very obvious, and that is the importance of tone, and staying the course with tone, making sure you don't deviate too far. Because as a writer, you have enormous power when writing a scene in changing the way that people feel about it. Because this is what people say when they're talking about the difference between story and plot. Because plot are the things that happen in a story, but what makes a story what it is the way that that's presented to the reader. So, for instance, let's say you just have a scene where your character opens the front door of their house because they're about to go for a jog. Right? So if you wanted a lighter, more uplifting tone, you could say, I swung open the front door and stepped out into the morning. There was a light wintry chill on the air that sent a little tingle down my spine, but I saw the way the sun was gleaming down on the houses across the street, and I prepared to go for my morning run. But if you wanted a darker tone, you could say, I unlocked the front door and stepped out into the world. I felt a cold chill on the air, light but enough to send a shiver down my spine. Across the street, the sun cut stark shadows into the other houses. I took the first few steps away from my home and started to run. Do you see what I mean? In both of those scenes, the exact same things happened, and yet, because of the way I describe them, both of them have very different feelings to them. And that's before we get into the whole fact that, I mean, you're the story writer. You can change this world however you want. If you want it to be a cold winter morning, or if you want it to be a beautiful summer night, like, that's up to you. You can make it what you want, but you have so much power to make a story feel the way you want the reader to feel, and I don't think this story quite achieved that in the second half. So even though I enjoyed the plot of this story, I really didn't like the way that it felt, because I didn't feel like I was reading the story I wanted to read. So that's why it's important. Like, I know you shouldn't feel beholden to genre, but to me, when I say that, I mean you should feel free to write whatever you want, but if you're writing a story and you tell people that it's a horror story, it better bloody well feel like one. But the second thing that I get from this book, and I feel like I have to say this after I've been bashing the second half of it so much, is just go for it. Your weird, crazy idea, just go for it. Like, on the surface, yes, I know it seems stupid to have someone wearing a white suit and dancing around going naught, naught, and getting struck by lightning. I mean, again, this is the third book now with the weird magic lightning, but hey, at least in this one, she's actually dressed up like a witch, so it makes more sense. But, you know what? Even though on the surface it might look stupid, it works for the story. In the story, she has magical powers, she has these gargoyles, she has control, she's a queen, she's dressing up like that. Like, it makes sense for that. It's weird. I will never deny that it's weird, but it's also interesting and memorable. I was only disappointed, like I said, because the tone was off, but if you wrote this story and you made that stuff with the right tone, made it scary, have the strange ritual that she's doing around him, you know, and then she has to escape jumping on the back of the gargoyle, like, you could make that all scary, and if you did, this book would have been fantastic. And so I'm not saying the plot was dumb. The plot was not dumb. It was weird and different. So I don't want anyone hearing my critiques to think, oh, so I really shouldn't do the weird, crazy, stupid stuff. Like, no, please do the weird, crazy, stupid stuff. Just put in the effort to make sure it's interesting, get your tone right, and then you can have one of the most memorable books out there. So that was Bone Chillers number 16, The Queen of the Gargoyles. A really fun idea, didn't quite stick the landing. But next time, firstly, hopefully my voice will be all healed up, so there's that to look forward to. But we'll also be looking at a book that was also a fun idea, but didn't quite get the ending right, but for a completely different reason. And as for the person who wrote it, it's a long story. So hey, if you thought this was scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time.